Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. This is a live webinar on best practices for conducting an internal audit. And we've got Jonathan Fuhrman from A2LA here with us to kind of go through these best practices and these tips. I can't tell you how excited we are for this presentation. This might be our biggest webinar to date. So we're very excited to bring you this content and this educational opportunity. But before we jump into that, I do want to go through a couple of housekeeping items. Number one, we are recording this webinar. And so if you have to leave early, you want to share it with others on your team, recordings will get sent out, usually tomorrow, once we get it all finalized and set up, to your inbox and your email. And so you can always rewatch this again if you would like to. Also, we are going to be opening up the session at the end to questions and answers. So if you have some throughout the presentation, don't wait till the end. Feel free to go ahead and put those in as they come up. We'll be monitoring those. And at the end, we'll take the last 15 minutes of the conversation to make sure that we're answering those questions for you. So definitely feel free to participate and ask us anything you want to. Well, before we jump into Jonathan's presentation, I do want to give you a little bit of feedback about Qualtrics and who we are. So my name is Karen Arribiaga, and I'm an account executive here at Qualtrics. I've been with the team for about 5 years. And we do have a mix of attendees on today. So I do want to tell you a little bit about who we are. Qualtrics is actually a full compliance software platform specifically designed to manage quality initiatives. So organizations often turn to Qualtrics when they're looking to reduce or eliminate the burden associated with manual or paper-based quality systems. And they do this by automating key processes within our system. We've been around for quite some time, about since '93. The reason why Qualtrics exists is because our parent company was pursuing ISO 9001, and they really needed a way to streamline that process to ensure that no details were overlooked or missed. And so they started building software from scratch to help automate their quality system. And that happened to be the framework for Qualtrics. They crushed their audit, and the assessor comes in and says, hey, this is really great software. You should consider sharing it with others. And that's what we started doing. So today, more than 25 years later, we are a leader in the quality and compliance industry. And we're really happy to count several accrediting bodies among our customers, including our presenter today, A2LA. So without further ado, I do want to introduce you to Jonathan. So Jonathan is the product certification program manager for A2LA. He supports the day-to-day operations of accreditation by assisting many A2LA clients in obtaining and maintaining accreditation to ISO 17065, 17025, and 17020. As a member of the electrical and product certifications team, he works with electrical and mechanical testing labs, as well as certification bodies operating in the field such as construction materials, energy efficiency, and even wireless device certifications. So prior to joining A2LA, Jonathan actually served as a quality assurance and market access and factory surveillance roles, and has over the decade of audit experience working with organizations like A2LA, NAVLAP, IECEE, OSHA NRTL, and the Standards Council of Canada. So Jonathan, at this time, I am going to stop sharing my screen and let you take control.
Great, thank you so much, Karen, appreciate it. And let me go ahead and get this started. Okay, folks, hey, thank you very much for attending today. I'm really happy to be here. Definitely thanks to Karen and Qualtrics for hosting this event. As Karen mentioned, most of my professional life is kind of centered around the internal audit or the audit process, management system, quality assurance, those sorts of things. So yeah, I'm excited to be here with you all today and kind of share a little bit about my experience and my take on that process and really the value that internal audits as a tool can play for your organization. So just a couple of things I want to mention up front. I've done my best to keep this presentation sort of neutral in terms of management system. I'm not sure if you happen to work for a lab, if you happen to work for an inspection body, maybe you work for a manufacturer, something like that. So I just want to make sure that the content universally applies to whoever may be here on the call. And I also want to say that I will use certain terms interchangeably, mostly assessment and audit, or assessor and auditor. Just know that I'm referring to the same thing. Yeah, so I'll bounce back and forth between those terms. And then lastly, yes, for anybody that just signed on after the introduction, this recording is going to be made available to everybody who registered. And then I'll be available at the end for questions. So we can talk a little bit about the presentation material. So as far as how we're going to go about discussing the value of auditing, we're going to cover it through these topics. Basically, do an overview of the audit process, talk about some best practices, emphasize the general requirements of many of the ISO standards, keeping the assessment on track. Also, what the audit process looks like, how to go about planning for it, who to involve in the audit, as well as things to keep in mind when you're actually conducting it, and then how to kind of resolve the whole process and follow up on the assessment. So beginning with basic concepts, I like to start just kind of throwing the question out there: why do we perform audits? And I think that, generally speaking, we're going to come to some combination of the following answers. It could be about verifying compliance. It might be an effort to improve the system. It might just kind of be a diagnostic check to see how the system's functioning. And then in some cases, maybe the audits are only performed really to meet the regulatory or accreditation requirements that are involved. So generally, it comes down to accomplishing some one or more of those objectives, and we'll review each one a little bit in a little bit more detail. So the organizations that we work with, that we've adopted the ISO framework, we've adopted that infrastructure into our fields. Obviously, we're committed to reliability and excellence, and we take it upon ourselves to define those standards. And so we can perform audits and verify that we operate in the manner that we aspire to. So the audit records serve as an objective picture of where the organization stands with respect to those goals. And that can be very important. Beyond that, maybe we do it as an investigative exercise to kind of look for opportunities for improvement. We, through careful sampling, we're looking at individual processes, or maybe we're looking at the management system as a whole. And we do an objective review to identify high and low points that might require additional attention, that may require some sort of revision or corrective action, as we'll talk about. And again, in some cases, maybe we're just doing these audits to fulfill third-party requirements. And I don't necessarily want to kind of portray that as less noble than any of the other reasons I've mentioned. The fact is that, we operate in a field that demands tremendous accuracy, complete attention to detail. Whether our work is involved in occupational safety, public safety, we know that the stakes are very high. So if you're involved in this business, the value and the importance of repeatability in terms of your operations. So lastly, another essential aspect of the audits is that it provides a status report for management. It's going to give them insight onto where the organization stands, where it's headed relative to its goals. And hopefully management will be able to get some sort of value and understand how to better steer the organization moving forward, just to make sure that it remains in alignment with its goals, and that it's making forward progression in terms of improving the situation for itself and for clients. So one thing I want to get out of the way before we get too far into this is this is sort of a cardinal rule of audits. If you can't express a nonconformity in the words of the standard, in the words of the organization's policies and procedures, a specific test method or a customer requirement, you absolutely do not have a nonconformity. This warrants saying out the gate. It's a huge pet peeve for me as a QA manager, or when I was a QA manager and now as an accreditation officer. And perhaps you've run into this in some of the assessments that you've experienced with different organizations. Again, the audit is most useful when it is strictly objective. So you're going to get the best value out of it when you're tying observations to direct, strict interpretations of the audit criteria. And you want to avoid any tendency to kind of wander or go astray from that, and sort of build audit criteria out of perception and best practices and that sort of thing. You want to make sure that you're holding your organization accountable to the strict language. And that's not to say that broader interpretations don't have a place. They can be valuable in terms of preventive actions possibly. But yeah, the audit needs to be an objective measurement of performance against documented standards. The findings, if they come up, they need to be tangible and evidence-based. And this also ties into kind of prepping your organization and making sure that they understand why you're doing the audit. It's not uncommon for folks to be a little bit intimidated by audits. Some are obviously going to be more intimidated than others. They may fear that they're specifically under the microscope as an individual, or that the audit process is somehow an extension of their personnel evaluation. In my experience, I would always emphasize that audits were a test of the system. It was about holding the system accountable, not individuals. And I try to use that point to get folks to provide feedback and really kind of let them know that, hey, this is a process that you participate in. The more feedback you provide, the more you're going to be able to improve the situation for yourself. But keep in mind that you're not going to be able to convince everybody. In my career, I've been called jokingly, internal affairs, Benedict Arnold, that sort of thing. And it's important to make the effort to impress the right idea of what audits are, what the purpose is with folks before starting them. And ideally, auditors, when you're performing the audit, you're kind of alert to that dynamic and that issue, and you're flexible enough that you're kind of changing up your footing, you're adapting your interview techniques to make everybody as comfortable as possible. Otherwise, if people are nervous or people are confused about what the audit's for, it kind of impedes the whole thing and compromises the objectivity. So if we remember, the main purpose of the process, the internal audit process, is to focus on finding compliance. Everybody, with that in mind, everybody should be able to walk away feeling good about the outcome, regardless of whether or not there were non-compliances. The objective here is to measure compliance, identify things that need attention, and to enable continuous improvement over time. Definitely the mindset that you want to have as an auditor is that you're a fact finder. You're there to take inventory against all the audit criteria that applies to the organization. So you really want to kind of keep that in mind, take a simple approach to this. Don't overcomplicate things for yourself or for anybody else. So, and to keep things simple, you kind of want to keep it oriented, keep the questioning oriented around three ideas, which is, does the organization say what they do? Do they have written documents, policies, procedures, whatever, that meet the requirements of ISO 17025? Okay, there's this slide. Unfortunately, I'm only referencing the ISO standard for test labs, but whatever the core normative criteria is, if it's 17025, 17020, 17065, the first thing we want to ask is, does the organization intend to meet the requirements specified in that core standard? From there, we want to take a look at what is the organization actually doing? Are they performing the work in such a way as they have said they would in their procedures? And then finally, where's the proof? Are they able to prove it in their records? Do they have sufficient records to back up, that not only are they meeting the intent of the standard, but their implementation is also compliant with their specific operation. And yeah, you can kind of reframe this, thinking of it in terms of intent, implementation, and effectiveness. Does the organization have documentation meeting the intent of the criteria? Has the organization implemented that intention in the right way? And then what does the evidence say? Does the evidence actually confirm that the intention and implementation is valid and appropriate? So turning over to planning and scheduling, here's a figure of the audit process. Really you can kind of divide this up into however many different parts you want. But for me, I think it's easiest to kind of think of in terms of 3 to 4 phases that recur over time. So, beginning with that initial planning phase, here what we need to do is define the objectives, identify all the criteria that's going to be involved, and come up with a general schedule for the audit activity. We're going to know what the requirements are, what the outputs are, and what different resources will be involved. So, those are soft resources in terms of records and procedures, but also, individuals' time. You may need time to walk through and look at equipment, instrumentation, materials, that sort of thing. And then also as part of this, you really want to do like a robust internal review of management system documentation, just so you have a good understanding of the landscape before beginning the audit. Also, as part of that, you want to take a look at the results of the last previous assessment. That will also help you navigate and figure out what areas to focus on, and how to move through the process. So yeah, I mean, if we plan effectively, we come up with a good plan covering everything that needs to be audited. It pretty much drives itself from there. At an opening meeting, you would share that plan with the audit participants. You would let them know, specifically what the expectations are, what their role is going to be, that's really good for getting buy-in and cooperation for the audit. Once you get into the meat of the assessment, you're directly evaluating the performance and the ability of the organization against all the criteria that was identified in the first phase. So this is, for the most part, you're working with a lot of different checklists, or maybe you're working with one mega checklist that kind of captures all the different criteria involved. But yeah, once from there, you can wrap up with a formal closing meeting. Based on the check against the relevant criteria, you'll have identified gaps, and you can present those gaps as non-conformities, which the organization will handle through root cause analysis and corrective action. And then you kind of set that process in motion, and you set the stage for the next round of internal audits. If it's a year later, 6 months later, whatever the interval may be. So another example of that, you assemble the criteria, you get the right individuals involved, you understand how you want to go about sampling and when this is all going to be performed. Conducting the audit, you review the available evidence, you see if it meets the applicable criteria. Once that evidence is documented, you've got that recorded in your checklists, you can begin to make statements about what actually complies and what doesn't. And from there, you go about issuing deficiency statements or nonconformities. These would be the issues that need to be addressed by the management system of the organization. After that, we typically perform some sort of a verification that the corrective action was successful in resolving the finding, and that it effectively reduces the chance that that finding is going to recur in the future. So some things to think about when putting together that schedule. You're going to want to address, really make sure that all the elements of the management system and technical activities have been addressed. So you're going to want to go through all the different policies and procedures, all the different technical activities, any criteria, the core ISO standard. If you're working with an accreditation body, you're going to want to look at their specific policies and procedures. This model, we kind of refer to this as a whole system audit. Yeah, you would base this scheduling really looking at all those different pieces of criteria and then kind of doing a risk analysis based on your familiarity with the organization, historical performance, and you would define from there, how you're going to go about sampling all of these different activities and verifying compliance. So the schedule ideally should include, which elements are going to be audited at which time and who's going to take responsibility for each audit. So I'll provide a counterexample to this, but yeah, the idea of a whole system audit, the intent here is that you do a detailed audit of the entire system from start to finish. You take a look at all the processes involved. You take a look at all the inputs and outputs of the entire organization. And, this gives you obviously, the most comprehensive look at how the organization is performing. But the obvious negative to this approach is that it takes a lot of time to prepare for this sort of audit. The audit is definitely going to have impacts on daily operations of the organization. So keep that in mind. And in contrast to that, we would talk about periodic or section audits. Here, instead of doing an audit of the whole management system, we break down that audit plan to maybe go on a department by department schedule, maybe look at individual policies or individual criteria over a specified interval. Obviously, this is much more manageable. It gives you a lot of flexibility, and it's much more customizable. But the big con here is that you don't get that full organic view of how departments kind of interrelate with one another. And those areas tend to be more risk prone. So keep that in mind when considering this approach. But here would be an example of a periodic or section audit schedule, where you just see kind of different activities on the left-hand column, and then those are distributed throughout the year progressively. And truthfully, I think probably the best way to go is to kind of find a hybrid model that incorporates the best from each, and just kind of experiment with those formats and see what fits your organization best. I would always recommend that you document the logic behind the audit activity in the plan. Make sure that there's a record that kind of details, how you arrived at the specific plan that you've implemented. And something else that we can talk about, some other formats, are horizontal audits versus vertical audits. And a horizontal audit, this would be an audit of a specific system procedure. It could be a specific activity, it could be a specific type of record. But the idea here is that you're looking at a single element across a wide selection of samples. So you're really able to kind of understand, what is my organization's how's my organization do in terms of handling training records? You could look at that in each individual department that you work with, and you can see, is the organization applying it consistently, or are there some issues going on, something like that. Again, this kind of like the section audit, it doesn't address the combined inputs, which is really going to kind of give you that picture of the full process that you need. But this is definitely useful. And I would recommend, using risk analysis. If something's low risk, low severity, unlikely to occur, it might be a good candidate to focus on through a horizontal audit. So vertical audits are the opposite of that, and kind of go back to the whole system that I was talking about. This would be, you're taking a look at the organization's work from head to toe, from the very beginning. You're sampling the entire project experience. And this is probably the approach that you're most familiar with, working with accreditation bodies, or maybe working with customer audits, supplier audits, those sorts of things. So the advantage here, again, is that you get that full picture of the work as it happened. You can review it in sequence. It shows you all those interfaces and all those handoff stages between different departments or groups. And it gives us the best picture of the customer experience. So it's really useful in that regard. And it's probably the most representative sampling that we can do. But obviously, a lot more time is involved in this. And so it reduces the number of projects that we can look at. So again, I would recommend, find a rhythm that works for you and for your organization, pivot back and forth between these approaches. During the planning phase, your knowledge of the organization, it will tell you, kind of guide you on how to apply these approaches correctly. So selection of auditors. Okay, so let's imagine that we have a schedule in place. We have a good sampling strategy. We know what we're looking for. We know how we're going to record it. The next stop is figuring out, okay, who's going to be performing this audit? So keep in mind, you can have the best procedures, best plans, best scheduling in place. If you put the wrong auditor on the job, the value of the audit could really go out the window. So in some cases, you all might be, the primary QA representative of your organization, and you're performing the audits for the most part. These are just things that we want to talk about, just different personality and different soft skill aspects that you want to think about when figuring out who's going to be doing the audit. So obviously we want somebody that has a solid understanding of the management system and the objectives, the criteria that's involved, and probably has a little bit of history with the company. They understand how the company works together, has some perspective on that history. And we also want these folks to be competent in the individual areas they audit. If I'm purely a QA person, I might be able to identify some procedural gaps or oversights of a testing procedure. But if I don't have a background in that specific test technology, I'm not really going to be able to tell you whether or not a procedure is valid. So you want to make sure that whoever's performing those assessments, that they come kind of with the right perspective to look at those things. And overall, you want somebody that's able to kind of probe and analyze, but not give off sort of an interrogation vibe when they're interviewing folks. People that have good information and evidence collection skills, good poise, integrity, and just kind of project this positive attitude. And especially objectivity. I put here, how familiar should an auditor be with what they're auditing? What about impartiality? As much as possible, we want to maintain independence through the audit. So, we don't want to assign somebody to essentially grade their own work. We want to make sure that we're getting an unbiased perspective on that. And as for qualifications and training, people can be trained on auditing through courses like these, in-house training, using just the core standards and the organization's management system. Typically that training would be performed by the quality manager or somebody within the quality administration. Once they're qualified, you can kind of get them working on the personal dynamics that are involved, and what I call the human relation aspects of auditing. And so, we want to make sure that the auditors that we select, that they are good, well-adjusted human beings that know how to interact with other human beings, and folks that, again, can kind of like switch up their communication methods to keep folks at ease, foster a good rapport, and make sure that folks are engaged with the assessment process. So I kind of touched on this earlier, but you really want to be mindful of those interpersonal dynamics. No two individuals are the same. You want to make sure that you can customize your questioning to meet the needs of those individuals. Of course, make sure that people feel open and comfortable. Otherwise, you kind of risk jeopardizing the results of the audit. Speaking personally, this was really one of my favorite aspects of auditing and working in quality, was just kind of like working with people, finding the communication style that suits them best, and explaining to them why their feedback was important. That's a really good opportunity. It's a good time to kind of impress upon folks that QA is all about continuous improvement and that they have a role in that process. So some things to emphasize with that. Audits are a series, or audits are a very valuable and detailed tool for management, but it's really only one of a series of inputs that management's going to look at when they kind of figure out how to steer the organization. Audits are about finding facts, not faults. You don't go into an audit knowing that you're going to nail a department for a specific issue. It's about verifying compliance, confirming compliance. Absolutely, if somebody is going to give off the vibe, either intentionally or unintentionally, that finding deficiencies brings them joy, you probably don't want to have them involved in the assessment. And overall, how an auditor presents themselves, that goes a long way in determining how folks will respond. You want to make sure that you avoid hierarchical dynamics that might interfere with the fact finding. If somebody walks into the audit as a figure of authority, you're very likely to spoil the milk. So I would suggest walk into the assessment as a professional that's respectful of people's time and diligence. Go into it with a good faith attitude. From that, you should be able to kind of develop a rapport that will lead you to the answers you need to complete the audit. And as part of that, you want to think of the following. So body language, you want to make sure that you are not only are you actively listening mentally, but that your body says so, your eye contact says so. It's very easy to get bored and kind of wander off on a separate conversation about something in our own minds. Yeah, we want to make sure that we're not jumping to conclusions or making assumptions. We want to let people complete their thoughts, and we want to honor, their contribution to the audit. So I definitely, read the room, give folks a chance to breathe. If you made a good effort with planning, you shouldn't be in any rush. Sometimes it takes folks to warm up. So, if somebody needs a little bit of time before they really start providing good information, allow them that. I think, kind of going back to the internal affairs vibe, tension is sometimes unavoidable. The best you can do is kind of understand that and do your best to manage it and assure folks, what the purpose of auditing is. I've had a lot of success with, when you're working with somebody, try to find some kind of commonality with them. Maybe you had a similar role in your career, or you interface with somebody who did something similar to what they do. Do that, express thanks for their input, where earned, provide positive feedback to them. If you learn something as a result of the interaction, be sure to note that. If you're a positive auditor, then it's just going to kind of enable the whole process and let the whole thing breathe. Okay, so let's take a second to revisit the audit sequencing, just to kind of make sure that we're clear on how all of this comes back together. So another breakdown of sort of the phasing of the audit. Remember, prior to this, we're going to be doing a document review, which also helps kind of inform our plan and helps us get that documented. Doing that homework up front will make the audit experience successful really for everybody, but especially for the auditors. You want to take a look at those management system documents, perform a gap analysis of the requirements, going into the audit, things that you suspect might be an issue that you want to follow up on further. You want to make sure that you have those checklists identified and what kind of questions you're going to be going into those interviews with, and just make sure that you're familiar with the landscape. And ideally, once that's available, you can kind of walk into that opening meeting and the agenda will just drive itself. That's not to say that you're not going to have to shuffle things around from time to time, to meet the circumstances of each day, but you pretty much have the whole thing charted out at that point. Aspects of it can kind of drive themselves. And so, yeah, as we conduct the assessment, we want to get a complete perspective on the work that's performed. So a couple of different ways that we can go about gathering that information and evidence, asking questions. Obviously, I've talked a lot about interviewing and the importance of that. In addition to getting, personnel feedback, we're also going to want to take a look at the facility itself, equipment, instrumentation, equipment calibration. If there are reference materials or supplementary materials that are used, we want to take a look at those, in the environment, but then also take a look at the records supporting them. We're going to want to take a look at reports and different types of records regarding the activity that the organization is involved with. And then we're also going to want to do, see actual demonstrations of the work performed. Possibly, you're able to observe real work in real time. Otherwise, maybe you can do kind of a mock assessment of specific activities. And, ideally, those records and work, they reflect one another, and you get a good sense of the organization's performance. So some key questions to ask, with the interviewing, you really want to make sure that you're confirming that folks they have a practical understanding of what's involved and how to do it, but they also have a theoretical understanding of what's involved. So yeah, ask folks what's happening, why it's happening, what's the reasoning behind these things, why is the system implemented in the specific way it is. Keep in mind that some folks, they do better in kind of an open-ended question format, and you might need to switch to a closed-ended question format to kind of help navigate the conversation and get to the information that you're looking for. So, an open-ended question would be, you allow somebody to kind of elaborate on their own, versus a closed-ended where, you're asking directed yes or no questions. But yeah, be empathetic, bring the audit to that person's level, let them know how important they are to that overall process, and things should go well. And yeah, so you can take charge in those interviews by leading the discussion or directing them, asking somebody to kind of lead and explain a process in its entirety. And flexibility is extremely important in this role. So just make sure that you're pivoting back and forth and doing whatever you need to do to kind of get the audit completed, to verify the evidence, but also to maintain a good rapport and get the information that you need. So my last piece about the in-audit activities, make sure that there is a logic to the way you go about sampling the work, and make sure that you document that logic in an audit plan or in the audit report. Document that somewhere. If you're performing internal audits on an annual basis, you want it to be reflective of the entire year. So you're going to want to look at recent records, some not so recent records directly after the last round of corrective actions, to really give you a full picture of the work that's involved. And so, yeah, going into the last phase, we can talk about how all these different ideas kind of resolve. The outcome of the audit needs to be documented, and it needs to address, it needs to include a factual description of the audit activities. Again, only the facts are to be reported. It needs to be objective and in alignment with the criteria that's involved. I would recommend, including a discussion about the planning and sampling methodology as part of the report. And the specific things that you're going to want to see there are a title or report number, something that's traceable, that designates that document. Observations and recommendations, you can include those in an audit report so long as they're properly identified. You don't want there to be any confusion about whether or not those are findings. In my experience, I would sometimes publish those under a different document, but do what works best for your organization. When it comes to deviations and non-performances, you want to make sure that these are written as clear and concisely as possible. What this deficiency statements amount to is, you're giving whoever takes responsibility for that activity, you're giving them all the evidence that they need to go about performing a root cause analysis and successfully, understanding and investigating the issues that transpired that led to that particular deviation. So yeah, you need to give them all the information in a very clear way. And a formula that I've always used is starting a deficiency statement saying where the issue was observed. So, maybe it was observed in the mechanical lab, or maybe it was observed in a organization's personnel competency procedure. So yeah, where was the issue observed? What the issue was? What was it that was found that is specifically non-conforming to the audit criteria? From there, yeah, what is the criteria that it specifically contradicts, and what does it need to be in compliance with? So, by providing all of those things, the people that are responsible for implementing corrective actions, performing that root cause analysis, they have all the information they need to go back and fully understand what the issue was and what's going to be involved in correcting it. Okay, in the closing meeting, this is where you're going to establish next steps and present the outcome of the audit. And, this is really important. You've done a lot of hard work with the organization. Yeah, you want to go into that meeting with as much, having set expectations and having the buy-in about the audit process. So truthfully, closing meetings, they can be a little contentious at times, depending on how the assessment goes. I would recommend, try to manage that by periodically throughout the audit, addressing your potential observations and findings throughout. You don't want there to be any surprises at a closing meeting. So set those expectations as you go along the way. Another important thing about that is, if in your sampling you encounter an issue, and on the onset it seems like, okay, this is clearly there's a procedural gap. The organization does not appear to address this requirement from ISO standard X. But if you give the organization time to dig into it, it may emerge that it's actually more of an implementation issue or something along those lines. So you just want to make sure that the findings that you end up presenting, that the evidence is there to really explain why what happened and why they occurred. So the next steps, yeah, corrective actions, are they going to be required? And that's usually a part of the assessment process. If there's some kind of risk that's involved, a deviating condition that throws technical results into question, you're going to seek out corrective actions as the remedy. And part of that's going to be root cause analysis. Somebody's going to kind of look at all the possible factors that could have played in to that incident. There are a couple of different models of this. There's the 5 whys and so on. From that, that's going to direct them to the best possible solution, the most effective solution for resolving that issue. It'll be implemented and recorded. And then at some point, it'll go back and be checked for effectiveness. As far as observations and recommendations, they can be broad or specific. There aren't really true rules for those. I would say that the norm overall is that an observation or recommendation would discuss something that doesn't quite qualify as a deficiency, but definitely warrants the organization's attention, something that may very well become a deficiency down the road. So the precise follow-up process is going to differ really based on the needs of each organization. But everything will be resolved through root cause analysis and corrective action. Typically, there will be a time frame that's attached to that process. It might be 30 to 60 days, depending on the management system. And then, maybe 90 days after that, there might be some sort of verification check to go back and make sure that that corrective action was implemented properly and it successfully closed out that issue. And kind of, assuming that the findings were successful, you turn your attention to the next assessment cycle. And it's kind of a past as prelude thing. Planning the next assessment begins with a review of the previous assessment and the work that was performed there, taking into account that the organization's past performance, and using that to create another audit program for the next year. So at this point, you've gone full circle. You're back to the beginning of the audit phase, and or however you prefer to visualize that process. And that kind of brings us to our summary. The big takeaways here, I want to make sure that you all walk away with this knowing that audits need to be compliance-based. You want to stay within the lanes of the criteria of the ISO standards. You don't want to go off target with that. The audits are best when they're measured against concrete requirements. The outcome of the audit is really driven by the quality of the planning that goes into it. If you do your homework up front, you're going to have that much more successful of an audit. Make sure that the individuals that you put in place to perform the audit, that they have the right social skills, and that they're able to give off the right intent of the audit and make, obtain buy-in from the individuals that they work with. So I think that overall, by concentrating on those things, effective planning, it's going to end up yielding detailed records. And, through that, you'll stay involved with the follow-up and verification process, and you'll be, progressively moving on to the next audit cycle from there. So again, I'm going to be available for questions. I think we're going to go back to Karen, and she's going to talk a little bit about Qualtrics and how some of that overlaps. But yeah, thank you very much for attending. I really appreciate hanging out with you all this afternoon, and I will be available after Karen's presentation. I do just want to mention real briefly, if you're not aware, A2LA, we have a sister organization, A2LA Workplace Training. Definitely encourage you to check out their webpage when you have the chance. There's a lot of really good content available through Workplace Training. Definitely think of them as a training resource for all sorts of topics. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. Jonathan, I'll tell you, I think what's really exciting, I'm pretty sure I can talk for everybody that is on this call, is that there are so many takeaways from your presentation that we're going to be able to kind of better understand, how to go through these internal processes. So thank you. I think that was very thorough. You can tell based on the questions that we have coming in. So what we'll do, I will not spend too much time on Qualtrics. I just want to give you a quick little look to see how you do internal audits through our system, and then we'll dive into those questions. So keep them coming. And if we don't get to your questions, we'll make sure that we reach out to get some of those answers to you. So what we're doing in Qualtrics, with Qualtrics in mind, what we're trying to do is be that one location for not just to house your documents and your SOPs and your processes, but also to be able to collect those records that Jonathan keeps referring to and all that evidence. How do you make sure that you can prove to your auditor that you are proving conformance to the standard that your organization is under? And this is really where Qualtrics comes into play. So this is Qualtrics, the screen that you see here. And when you look at the screen, when you see this screen, I'm going to go over to workflows, which workflows for Qualtrics are ways to automate processes. We actually have one for audit management. So let's click this. What I'm going to do is scroll all the way down and show you the diagram of the process that we're going through in our system. When our customers use Qualtrics to manage their audits, what they're doing is scheduling the audit, planning and going through some of those preliminary details and making sure that they have all those in one place and know exactly what information needs to be audited. And when Jonathan talked about, creating the next audit based on the information that you collected in the audit that you just had, we have a lot of organizations that will kick off and schedule that audit right during that last audit wrap-up call. So you can schedule it, get some of those preliminary details. It gets other people who are going to be doing the audit get notified so they can go ahead and prepare for that audit. And then we're going to guide them through actually conducting the audit, the review step. And then, of course, in the event that there is a nonconformance that is identified, kicking off a corrective action request directly in Qualtrics to make sure that that also goes through all the necessary steps. What these workflows in Qualtrics are doing is guaranteeing that you've got process control. Because whether you're doing it paper-based or you're logging it through Excel, you can't necessarily control that everybody's going to do the internal audit process the same way every time, and that you're collecting all of the details in the right capacity to be able to prove conformance to your auditor. Qualtrics really allows you to have that, that control to make sure that people aren't deviating from those processes. So if I scroll here to the top, we're at step 1, which is just collecting some of those audit details. So in this case, what kind of audit is it? This is a scheduled internal audit. Who is being assigned to do this audit? In this case, I'm going to choose my testing quality manager. They're going to be the ones that are conducting this audit. If it was an external audit, what organization's coming in, what section of your organization needs to be audited. You'll notice that I actually don't have anything to select here. That is because at Qualtrics, we're going to teach you how to build out your own select lists here in our system. Then we're going to tell the people doing the audits exactly what they need to audit. So this could be guiding them through and telling them that they need to audit to a specific ISO standard. In this case, maybe it's 17025, could be 9001, 13485, any type of compliance that you're under. You also could specifically label different documents that they need to audit as well. We also have an ability to add a document field where you can actually link that to the documents that are being housed in our system as well. When it comes down to the standard, you can actually bring in the specific clauses of that standard. So you can run gap analysis and your reporting and such. And so if I wanted to, I could choose specific areas of the standard and have my team know exactly what they need to go through. And when Jonathan was going through his presentation, he talked about the importance of making sure that having an effective plan going in is going to lead to that success at the end of the audit. And so having Qualtrics to be able to collect all of these records and put them in one location for people to access really allows you to promote that success. When is that audit going to begin? So let's pretend this was an audit. We got out of our audit this time last year, and we want the audit to happen around the same time. So on April 1st, this audit needs to begin. You're letting people know when that needs to happen. So they're going to start getting notified by our system to take action. If there's any previous audit information that they need to be aware of, so like maybe in this case, there was an audit that happened and a car was associated with that around equipment maintenance. You made some adjustments to your equipment maintenance process. Now you need to go in and make sure you're checking that effectiveness to make sure that everything was done properly and you're not going to have those same issues and non-conformances moving forward. We're guiding people through the process. They would hit submit. It's going to automatically go to the people that need to perform the audit. They're going to get emailed by Qualtrics. They're also going to see the details associated with that planning and those objectives. So you can see here, that's all the information. And then when they're ready to conduct the audit, they would just hit go. At this point, Qualtrics is taking it down the next path, which is actually inviting attendees. Who needs to be invited to this? Maybe we want Kimberly, maybe we want Daniel to attend this audit. When is the actual in-person audit going to start happening? So maybe we'll say on the 2nd, we need it to be completed by the 6th. So we want to get through all of our questions. We want to get through all of those agendas and so on. At that point, you also have the ability to bring in documentation, bring in agendas, bring in checklists. So when you think about all those details that Jonathan was talking through, this is how you can add them to these records. You can bring them in as external files by just choosing them and adding them to these records. By doing this, think about what happens on the reporting side at the end of it. When you go to pull these records, everything and every detail associated with this internal audit is now going to be in one location for you to easily have access to. Once this has been submitted, then we start doing the audit. Let's say you're conducting an audit and now you have recognized that there is a nonconformance. Maybe those equipment management actions that you put in place last year really aren't as effective as you would hope they would be, and that's reason for another nonconformance. Well, that's where you start logging that information that you obtained during that audit. So what date, the section of the lab or the organization, the standards, what description. So in this, maybe the equipment maintenance needs more work. There's more nonconformances coming out of it, and we need just to really hone this down and make it more make it better for our organization. Was there any immediate action taken? Is there any supporting documentation? What was the original source? We found this during an internal audit. I'm actually labeling it that it came out of an internal audit. So that is a part of the record. At this point, you'll see that I'm going to submit this for review. So often it is going to quality, whoever is going to be reviewing all the details, making sure that this is a complete record. If everything looks good, they will go ahead and say that the audit materials have been reviewed, and you'll notice that it'll go away. At this point, the audit part has closed, but now we know that a nonconformance was found. Well, in Qualtrics, what that's going to do is automatically kick off a corrective action request in our system. So when Jonathan started going through that long list of things that you need to do for the corrective action process, our system is also set up to manage that as well. So if I go into corrective actions, you'll see these are the details that I submitted during that internal audit. The original source was that internal audit. And now we're going to take you through that full corrective action process, from developing the corrective action plan and getting through that root cause investigation to going back and forth between your team to make sure that that plan has been approved, to implementing it, and then making sure that it is effective. And so our system is built this way to really allow you to guarantee that you're approving compliance to your processes that you have in place. And so when, no matter if it's 17025, 9001, or any other type of compliance you're under, the system is allowing you to hold, to prove that you're following that standard in that specific clause if you use it the way that it is designed to be used. Now, every workflow that you see here in Qualtrics, so we went through two, we went through internal audits and we went through corrective action requests. What you see here on your screen when I click workflows are what we call our best-in-class workflows. These are workflows that are going to come pre-built with your system that speak specifically to compliance processes that are usually required. And depending on the type of compliance you're under, we have different sets of workflows that would apply to you. These are very specific to laboratories in 17025, but we have some also for 9001 and 13485 and some other industries as well, including environmental. However, Qualtrics is more than just some of this process automation. Not only do you get these best-in-class workflows, you're also able to create your own workflows in our system as well. So we have a lot of organizations that will take it a step further and actually create different logs for their organization, or do equipment maintenance or incident logs, even deviations and safety work orders and such like that. So you really have the ability to grow within our system as well. You're not going to hit a glass ceiling with Qualtrics. And we truly believe that, when you think about the principles of ISO and the idea of always identifying risks and opportunities for improvement, your system needs to be flexible enough to support that type of growth with your organization over time. And that's why we built the system the way that we did. So if I go back to my PowerPoint real fast, when you think about Qualtrics, workflows are kind of what we talked about today, as one aspect of our system, we also have the ability to do document management and document control, as well as testing and training. And at the end of the day, everything is reportable, and you can get that out through the visibility and our reporting to be able to really have a pulse of what is happening in your organization, specifically around those internal audits. Well, I know we've got tons of questions coming in. So Jonathan, I'm going to invite you back on. If you want to learn more about Qualtrics, let us know. We actually offer a 30-minute webinar. We can put that in the chat, the link to that. So it's a great way to learn more about our system and see a pretty quick demo of it. But Jonathan, let's start getting through some of these questions because we definitely have a lot of them. You there?
Yes. Yep. I'm here. Yeah. So it looks like, yeah, we've got about 26 questions in the question and answer window, and then a few in the chat as well. I'd love to really try and get through all of these. So I'm going to try and take a shotgun approach. But yeah, definitely if you have additional questions, feel free to follow up with me at A2LA.
Sure.
You can get my information through Qualtrics or reaching out directly. But yeah, I'll go through these. Well,
and Jonathan, I can actually read them off to you because some of them are repeats. So
okay.
we might be able to get through them pretty quick.
Okay, great.
So first one, I'm interested in how to bridge the generation gap. I'm an old tech, trust paper, new tech's like online, but I worry it tends to promote a mission.
Right. My suggestion for that would be to, depending on who's on your team, maybe find somebody that is tech savvy, but they're also very appreciative and interested in sort of the old school approach, and work with them to kind of collaborate and make sure that you develop a transition plan to really kind of evolve the paper element or the paper approach. That would be my recommendation. And yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the generation gap because yeah, the testing industry it's certainly present. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. If it's possible, could you also make a point or any points around remote audit approaches?
Sure. So, a lot of these standards, they give you flexibility or give you room to kind of document the justification for why you audit what or how you go about performing the audits. So yeah, if circumstances are such that you need to audit something remotely, you just want to capture that in the audit plan and in how you went about documenting and setting that plan up. Some of you are probably familiar, A2LA and a lot of other accreditation bodies throughout the COVID experience have been performing remote assessments. So that's part of life now, and I think that's definitely a valid approach so long as you kind of explain why you've taken that as opposed to an on-site.
Mm-hmm. Here's another one. I struggle with internal audits. We are a small organization, and we actually have a lot of questions here from small organizations. And what Thomas says is, I wrote the program and I oversee the program. Also, I'm a 17025 assessor. I tend to audit my lab like my outside labs. This doesn't seem appropriate. Any suggestions or comments?
So I definitely know what you mean about it not feeling appropriate. I don't think that there's anything inherently wrong with this so long as the audit process accounts for this somehow. When I was in a similar position, all of my work would be kind of double checked and re-verified by my superiors. Basically they would make sure that I investigated everything as fully and thoroughly as possible, including the things that I was responsible for. You might want to look at a supplemental check, or really just kind of diversifying, who all does the audits, bring some other people in, get some fresh set of eyes on those things that you have more responsibility for. And I think, that's something to mitigate and manage. And I think a lot of organizations run into that.
Mm-hmm. All right, next question. Does the internal auditor need to do a formal 17025 training course from an accreditation board?
I would say probably not. It definitely doesn't hurt. I think that whoever the chief management system representative is, you definitely want to seek out, external training for that. But all the individuals auditing, it's definitely possible to kind of grow that talent on site or with your employees just kind of internally.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about the ASQ certification audit or certified auditor certification? And I know we have a couple of these questions in here too.
So I think that these are probably good things. There are probably some fields and industries that put more value on this than others. I know that when I first underwent 17025 training, it was through an ASQ certification program. I didn't need to keep up with it myself in terms of maintaining the certification. But maybe there's some appeal to that for you. But I wouldn't say that that's necessarily like a mandatory thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then who is qualified to perform an internal audit?
So yeah, this is there's a lot that goes into this question, but the folks that are qualified are folks that have a good knowledge and understanding of the system in which the work is done, the technical requirements that go into that work, that they understand what the audit objectives are, and they have the right social skills to kind of navigate and facilitate teamwork to make that audit happen. So you're looking for a bunch of different qualities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I will say, we're probably going to go over probably about 10 minutes or so to try to get through as many questions as we possibly can. So if you're able to stick around, great. We would love to have you, but we understand if you would also need to drop at this point too. Another question that we have, Jonathan, is what's the difference between the internal audit and the management review?
Okay, so the management review is a separate tool. It's a separate activity. The management review, you can kind of think of it in terms of a State of the Union address. You're going to be taking a look at the organization's performance relative to a number of different concepts, one of which being the internal audits. The internal audit is an input into the management review. But yeah, I mean, they're both focused on kind of understanding the overall performance of an organization. But yeah, the internal audit factors into the management review, which involves other criteria that may not be involved in an audit.
Mm-hmm. I'll also let you know from we do a lot of webinars like this. And so I know we have a lot of new people that have never attended one of our educational webinars with our accrediting body partners, but we have done some with A2LA on management review. And so they've been recorded. Last year we did one actually on like top non-conformances, and one of those was management review. So always be on the lookout. We can send you the link and put it in the chat of where you can find our recorded webinars. But also this year, this is the first one of many that we'll do in this best practices webinar series. So always be on the lookout for educational opportunities that are coming from us, because we always like to dive in a little deeper on some of these questions and really get you some answers. So definitely be on the lookout. I know that we've got a couple of questions in here about, small laboratories, like 1-2 people, sometimes 5 people or less, performing internal audits. Who performs the internal audit if it's a laboratory the size of like 1 or 2 people in like a water treatment plant?
So, if the lab staff is only those, 1 or 2 individuals, if they're part of an organization that has, other departments or something like that, I would look to see how you can involve those folks to kind of provide a balance, just to make sure that the work was done as fully and completely as possible. I mean, in some cases, it's going to be difficult to duplicate the technical competence of folks, depending on how specialized the activities are. So I would just kind of look for, if I were in that situation, I would look to open it up to provide inputs to other interested parties, and have that documented. And I think that anybody that looks at that assessment record, they would understand the reality of your situation, and they would give credit where it's due. But yeah, definitely, mitigating it in that way would be what you want to head towards.
Mm-hmm. All right, and so you say it's kind of similar best practice for a laboratory that's like 5 people as well.
Yeah, and if you're able to, definitely look at the opportunity to switch up auditors from year to year. That also kind of lends some credibility to the assessment. And but yeah, I think that's what folks should kind of aim for with smaller teams.
Great. Selima asks, is a trace of tests, which equals data package audit level 4, the same as a vertical audit?
I'm not familiar with that term actually, but I can definitely say what a vertical audit is again, which is if I'm auditing a project that I performed at my lab, I'm going to start off by looking at the quote, looking at the request for quote, and that whole process, and I'm going to walk through every step of that project work all the way up to the output of a test report. So it's taking a look at everything from head to toe, top to bottom, just making sure that a full comprehensive review of that project is completed. So that's what you're aiming for with the vertical audit.
Okay, great. Does the lab need to audit every element of the quality system every year? And auditing a sample of the elements, for example, some test methods, is that good enough?
Right. So the answer is it can depend. In some cases, the criteria that applies to your program might have specific requirements that require you to audit every element every year. But there are some standards that definitely give you flexibility and kind of allow you to plan according to using risk analysis and priorities and such. So if you have an example that I would use is if you have something on your scope that you perform a service for a technology that is going that is quickly being obsoleted. It's very rare that you actually perform that work. Maybe you're only doing that to support a client like once every 3 years or something like that. That would be a good reason. You don't need to revisit that sort of like archaic, clearly on its way out technology every year. So yeah, I would look for those sorts of things. Do risk analysis, look at the severity, what's the level of risk involved, how likely is it to actually occur, and you can definitely customize an audit plan and not need to review every single element. Oh,
great. And this kind of aligns with one of the questions we had earlier. Is ASQ or CQA, is having that type of credential valuable?
It may be in your field. I know that, when I initially got a 17025 training, we specifically sought out somebody that offered that certification, but we didn't feel it was necessary to maintain that certification over time. I was working in the electrical and mechanical world, so over in life sciences or cybersecurity or a different field, that may be that may have more value in those fields. I'm not sure. So I would suggest looking into that. Yeah.
Great. Do you recommend using the assessment checklist for an internal audit? If not, how do you recommend we structure data collection?
So yeah. I mean, invariably, internal audits are going to involve checklists. So that's definitely the best way to capture the data. In a lot of cases, you're going to be documenting the evidence alongside the specific language, the criteria that's involved. I wouldn't recommend you not use an assessment checklist if it's available to you. Definitely if you work with an accreditation body that they have the checklist set aside, borrow what they're doing, or if you have to build your own, definitely do that. I'm not sure that that there's a better data collection method out there
than a checklist. We have another question that came a little bit later about how do you come up with an internal audit checklist? It sounds like they are specific to. Would you use like the T&I checklist for internal audits?
So I'm not specifically familiar with T&I, but I mean, I know that is a program. So yeah, if I worked with an organization that was participating in that program, I would definitely look to that checklist as part of my audit tool. But my recommendation, if you're if you're trying to create a checklist, I would do sort of like a documented outline or hierarchy of all the different criteria that plays into your lab's operations or your company's operations. And then, from there, see about how, you maybe through Excel or something like that, you can tie all those requirements into a single document in an organized way. That's how I would look at it. Really, kind of all these things, they flow down from the ISO standards that they're kind of based on, and then the criteria becomes more specific, whether it's the accreditation program or accreditation scheme, and then it goes to the local management system policies and procedures. So I would try looking at it as a hierarchy and starting there.
Can you address recommendations as preventive actions?
Absolutely. So if that works for your organization, by all means, you can do that. Preventative actions can occur as a result of those observations or recommendations, or they can occur outside of the audit process, whichever works best for you.
Can you give an example of a vertical audit?
Okay, so let's say I've got a project, a customer comes in and their project needs to undergo testing by 2 or more labs. And so, this is a really perfect opportunity for me to understand the customer experience from beginning talking about contracts with the sales team, or whoever brings in the work. What their interaction is like with all the individual departments, with individual support groups, et cetera. So I really want to take a look at this as an example. So I'm going to take a look at the complete body of criteria that I've assembled, and I'm going to run each aspect of that work through all of those individual points. So, I'm going to take a look at it from, the sort of initial preliminary phase, to how we won the work, contract review, was that done? How was the work assigned? Was it assigned to the right people? How do I know those individuals are trained? Did they use the right processes? Did they use the right materials, et cetera? I'm going to, go through that, a very long list of criteria, just to make sure that all of that, those requirements were met.
Mm-hmm. Are the auditors, here's another one. If the main objective of an audit is to confirm compliance to 17025, what percentage of non-compliance could we take as a dangerous threshold before declaring our system failure?
So that's a good question. You definitely want to kind of have that in mind as a quality person. I would say that with testing, the emphasis, the main idea behind 17025 is assuring repeatability. If at any point you feel that repeatability has been compromised, then that would be the threshold, in my opinion. That, or if repeatability is sufficiently at risk. So you're going to have cases where maybe you find out that testing wasn't performed correctly, or the wrong test device was used in that project, or something along those lines. Or maybe equipment comes back out of calibration after a project, and you have to address it that way. There are those sorts of things. But then there might also kind of be the potential for procedural issues and different stuff like that. So yeah, I would look to repeatability kind of as the deciding factor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Here's a question actually for Qualtrics. Is the software available in Spanish and for Central America? We actually do have language packs that are available that would convert your Qualtrics instance into a different language. I think we have about 13 language packs in all, everything from like French Canadian to French to Mandarin to Spanish, and so on. So yes, that would be something that would be available to you with the system. Here's another one, and I'll tell everyone I'm going to jump through some of these last questions, and then for the ones that we don't get through, we'll do some outreach to try to get you some answers. We have, this actually might be the most questions we've ever received in a webinar. So we'll go for another couple minutes, but then we'll go ahead and reach out to you one-on-one if we need to. How often should an audit be done in a laboratory, Jonathan?
So that's really going to be, it's going to depend on the needs of your organization and your performance overall. Obviously you'd want to perform audits more frequently if you run into a lot of issues, or if you operate with a lot of risk. But the norm is every 12 months.
Mm-hmm. Here's a question for Qualtrics. We are a small lab. Can Qualtrics be a cost-effective solution for our team of less than 10 people? That is a fantastic question that we get on a regular basis. When you look at the types of organizations that work with Qualtrics, we actually have a large number of laboratories that are 10 people or less that use our system. Some of our smaller organizations, I think our smallest to date is about 2 people, and it's a laboratory. It's a small wine lab in California. What you see is that Qualtrics can take the place of having sometimes like that dedicated quality manager. Sometimes that quality manager role is given to somebody that wears already multiple hats within the organization. And the quality manager role, I mean, Jonathan, you can talk to this. I mean, it's a very demanding role. And, sometimes that's required for an organization of a specific size to have a core team member on that and having that be their sole responsibility. For some of our smaller organizations, that's not something that they can do. So instead of hiring somebody that's directly dedicated to quality, they're sometimes able to bring in a solution like Qualtrics that costs less than bringing in an employee. To be able to manage quality and do a lot of that manual work that involved what we were talking about, like emailing people and making sure they get stuff done in a timely manner, tracking training records or tracking all the details of the document management process. That's where Qualtrics comes into play. And what you find is that the return on investment of a solution like that can really turn around very quickly for your organization. All right. Did you mention not auditing your own work or conflict of interest?
So I don't think I emphasized that as much as I could. I did talk about, making sure that the auditors are impartial, that there's no conflict of interest, that, you want them to be as independent as possible of the activity involved. In cases where you're unable to do that, that's where I recommended, kind of involving other individuals either to perform a verification or check on the work that you've performed, if you're in fact assessing your own work, or just kind of allowing others to have feedback into the audit process as a way of mitigating that.
Great.
But yeah, that's a very important point.
Great. And we have one more that we'll do, and then we'll make sure that we'll reach out with some additional, we'll go through the questions to be able to, we can get those to you. We are a very large organization, 4 regional laboratories that are standardized with regard to workflows and processes. How big should your team be to be effective?
That is a good question. I'm not
yep,
sure.
It's a depends answer.
Yeah, I mean, I hope you all can appreciate that. In this line of work, in the QA side, it's hinged on a lot of different factors. But I would say, depending on the amount of work, I would want to look at the scope. I would want to look at the number of departments involved, look at the number of engineers, technicians, et cetera. I think that if you have, I think that, as long as you have somebody that's kind of a solid management system representative that can kind of run all the responsibilities that would typically be assigned to a quality manager, and then kind of have some sort of support available for them, administrative support, things to help them make sure that the records are being done, or if you're using Qualtrics, to make sure that, the workflows are being fulfilled and documented properly. I don't think that you need to have a massive team, but definitely, having more than one set of eyes on the operation is important.
Fantastic. Well, everybody, again, thank you so very much. We are very thrilled to be able to provide this content to you and go through the questions that we're able to get through. Again, we're going to compile everything and reach out to you for those questions that we were not able to get to. I know there's about 23 of them. So as soon as we can get that information to you, we definitely will. If you have additional questions for us, even if you have questions for Jonathan, feel free to send them to Qualtrics. We can get a hold of Jonathan and get some of those questions answered. You can reach out to us at sales@qualtrics.com or webinar@qualtrics.com. And we are here to help you as much as we possibly can. Thank you, Jonathan. Wow. I mean, this is a record-breaking webinar that we had here today. So thank you so much for your participation and your content. It was really valuable.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. Everybody have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.